happy that all of you could come. Before I start, I should say a few good words about Hitesh. Actually, he's the one who has been pursuing this for many months now. And every month or so, he would send me a reminder saying, when are we going to have this? So it's actually due to his persistence that we are all meeting. So thank you, Hitesh, and of course, Abhilasha from the back has been supporting all this. Hitesh is the one who's been actually pushing the. So what I thought I'll do this evening is just give you a small overview of a book I wrote with another friend of mine, Vinay Davulkar, last year. The book is called 8 Steps to Innovation. I'll just pass the book around, you can have a look as I'm speaking. So what I'm going to do in the next 45 minutes or so is just give you an overview of what are the main points in the book. And then I'll be happy to answer any questions and we can have a little bit of discussion depending on how long you folks want to discuss. Okay. So let me just straight away jump into the book itself. Maybe a word or two about why we wrote this book. Before we wrote this book, my co-author Vinay and I, both of us were working in the innovation space. Vinay was consulting with companies and I of course was doing more of teaching and research. But both of us had some common questions. And one of those common questions was, how do you go about building innovation capability in the company? And the reason is some companies seem to have some kind of an innovation DNA. I mean, obviously, companies like Apple, the name kind of springs to mind. But several other companies seem to find that innovation is a very random process. It happens sometimes by chance, otherwise it doesn't seem to happen. And they don't seem to have any way of doing predictable and consistent innovation. So we thought it would be good if we could identify what does an organization need to do if it wants to build a more systematic innovation process. So that's really the focus of the book, and that's what I'm going to share. Of course, let me just start by telling you what I mean by innovation, because innovation itself is a very broad word, means many different things to different people. So in our perspective, we look at innovation in the business context. And in the business context, we consider innovation as involved in 4 things. Usually it starts with the problem. The problem, you can think of it in a broad sense. It's really about, okay, how do I, for example, do something at lower cost? How do I meet some need of the customer which has not been addressed before? Or how do I, basically different ways in which you could possibly create value for customers, cut costs. These are all very typical business problems. Now, if the problem you have has a known solution, then we are not calling it innovation. But if you can come up with a novel solution to solve that problem, typically that's where innovation comes into play. So clearly one of the most important things in the innovation process is ideas, because ideas are what really help you solve those problems in a new way. However, sometimes people make a mistake. They think that innovation stops here. In fact, in most large organizations, there's a lot of excitement about ideas. But you should see how the enthusiasm drops the moment you say, come on, let's take these ideas and try to make them work. Because that's when the hard work really starts. So, if you want the innovation process to be complete, this whole phase of execution where you are trying out ideas, validating them, combining them with other ideas, probably just doing a whole lot of experimentation is really the meat of it. Some of you might remember that in a different context, Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. That 99% perspiration is all in that execution phase, because that's when you're really doing all the hard work of innovation. And at the end of the day, you need to have some benefit or utility coming out of it. Otherwise, we don't call it innovation. So typically that means some additional value either to an external customer or to a internal customer. Either one of them should be getting some value. So my definition of innovation is the application of new ideas to solve problems, resulting in benefits to users. Now you can see that by the definition itself, this is very wide spectrum. It covers fairly small innovations, which may have a little impact, to breakthroughs as well. That's deliberate because if if you look at the innovation space, it actually includes all these different types of innovation. So one needs to be fairly broad in how one defines innovation. Just to give you a simple example, if you look at Tata Swatch, which is a water filter, many of you might have either used it or seen an ad for it. Essentially, it was trying to solve a simple problem. How do you provide clean drinking water at low cost? But also trying to do a few other things, trying to use a new technology. That's where the innovation came in. So the filtration mechanism uses rice husk as the primary material. It's impregnated with some nano silver to improve the purification properties, because silver is antibacterial properties. So these are all new ways of doing the filtration process, and at the same time it produces water at a very competitive cost, clean water. So this is basically a good example of what innovation is all about. Okay, that's just by way of introduction. The only other thing you might want to keep in mind is that there are of course different types of innovation. We are familiar with many of them. There could be product innovation. A lot of innovation in manufacturing is in processes. For example, Toyota is very well known for the Toyota production system, which is basically a new way of manufacturing, so that you could create lots of variety but not have too much inventory and inventory holding costs. These days, a lot of focus is on customer experience innovation, and that's particularly because of a lot of the advances we have seen in e-commerce and retail. And of course, the whole area of e-commerce is also full of business model innovation. Google is perhaps the best known for this. So you should really also realize that there are multiple types of innovation which organizations actually use. Okay, so now I'm coming to the meat of the presentation, which is really okay, the question I asked earlier. How do you build these innovation capabilities in a more structured way? So when we were doing the research for this book, we met lots of companies and we asked them, what's holding you back? Why aren't you able to do more innovation on a consistent basis? And we got three sets of answers. The first set of companies told us, we don't have a steady stream of ideas. And that's why we are not able to do enough innovation. Somehow, people in our organization don't seem to come up with enough ideas that can help us drive our innovation engine. So we are calling that a pipeline problem. Essentially saying that you are not generating that stream of ideas which can help you drive innovation. But a second set of companies told us, the problem is not with the pipeline. The problem is that though ideas come up, the ideas don't seem to advance. They seem to get stuck. Very typical situation. A company goes for an offsite. Everybody is very excited. They generate lots of ideas. Then they go back to office. 6 months later, they try to figure out, hey, what happened to all those ideas? Most of them have just disappeared, or people got busy with their usual work or whatever. So basically, the ideas get stuck. So we are calling that a velocity problem. And the third challenge which organizations reported was what we are calling a batting average problem, which is we are not seeing impact. Yeah, we are trying various innovation efforts, but it's not resulting in major increases in revenue, nor is it resulting in increases in profitability. Basically, the business impact we were looking for doesn't seem to be accruing to the organization. So what we sort of figured out from this is that if you want to build a strong innovation process, it's got to address all these three. It's got to address the pipeline problem, it's got to address the velocity problem, and it's got to address the batting average problem. So if you, the rest of our presentation is going to be focused on how do you address these three problems. Okay, so how do you build a pipeline? Well, there seem to be three important parts of this. The first one is laying a foundation. What is the foundation about? Foundation is saying you've got to understand what kind of innovation we should do, and we should put the basic processes in place. The second important part of building the pipeline is what we call creating a challenge. Now, there are so many different problems you can address. Remember I said that innovation is trying to solve business problems. But which problem should you address? Which one will really be useful to the company? Which one will really be impactful? So it's important to identify the right problems to overcome. That's what we are calling the creating a challenge goal. And last but not the least, you want to build participation. How do you get a better flow of ideas? You get a better flow of ideas if more people are involved in the innovation process. Now, this may not be so much of a problem in small companies where you have a small team, but as your team gets larger, then the R&D department gets charged with innovation and everybody else thinks it's not their job. But that means you're also losing the opportunity to get ideas from whoever. So if you want to build a pipeline, it helps a lot if you have more people contributing to the innovation. So I'm going to just spend a few minutes now elaborating each one of these points. Let's start with laying the foundation. Laying the foundation is really about identifying what kind of innovation is most important to your organization at a particular point in time. Let me give you two examples. Jack Welch was the CEO of GE for about 20 years, till about 2001. Any of you know what Jack Welch was famous for? What was he famous for in GE? Why was he such a legendary manager? Expanding horizon. What else?
Six Sigma.
Six Sigma, yeah. Actually, you are the efficiency maniac, right? So what he really did was he squeezed out all the waste and all the additional costs which were using methods like Six Sigma. So much so that when Jeff Immelt became the CEO, he realized there's not much more I can remove in terms of waste. If I want to do something, I need to create something new. That's why he challenged his managers. Can you guys come up with imagination breakthroughs, each of which has the potential to generate $1 million in revenue? Let me give you a different example. Cognizant Technology Solutions is a very successful company in the IT services space. About 3 or 4 years ago, they had a very peculiar problem. Their customers started telling them, look, you guys deliver good software, you deliver it on time, you do it within cost, and your quality is excellent. But what else can you do for us? I mean, this is all okay. Now we take all this for granted. What next? What's the next trick you are going to perform for us? So Cognizant guys start thinking, okay, so we got to do something different. So what did they do? They told their managers and associates, can you guys try to figure out in every project you do, can you do something additional which the customer didn't ask for? So basically they define innovation as some additional value you create for the customer beyond what is contractually required. And that became the focus of the entire innovation program in Cognizant. So what I'm really trying to tell you is that at any point of time, a company typically has certain priorities. And it's the job of the top management to identify what are those priorities and align the innovation activity with those. Because that really helps the innovation activity get more momentum in the company. Once you have done that, there are a few basic processes you need to put in place. One of these processes is what is called an idea management system. Once again, if your company has just 5 or 10 people, you don't need a very elaborate idea management system. But if once it gets a bit bigger, you probably want to find some way in which employees can easily share their ideas with the company. That's what idea management system is all about. So most companies set up a portal or some simple mechanism so that if any employee has an idea, he or she can share the idea with the company. There are a few things which are useful to keep in mind when you are doing this. Be clear about who's your source of ideas. Who are the possible sources? Yeah, almost all stakeholders, right? Could be employees, customers, suppliers, other partners. Sometimes it could even be a regulator. I mean, there are so many people who could possibly be. So you want to be clear about that. You want to be clear about the scope. It could be a system of very small ideas or large ones. In fact, Toyota has 2 systems. One for collecting incremental innovation ideas and another one for getting new car models, for example. These are 2 different systems. We need to be clear about the stages. How many steps will the idea pass through before it is approved or funded and taken ahead? Technology, how do you collect the ideas? Will you use a portal or will you use something as simple as a suggestion box? One of the most important here is selection. Because what most organizations find is if they are not transparent about the selection process, soon people start attributing all sorts of motives if their ideas are not accepted. So let's say somebody gives an idea and his idea is not accepted, but he doesn't know why, then he thinks, it's probably because he's not friendly with the boss or some other political reason, and so people stop sharing ideas with the company. And last one is funding. Many of the large organizations now are shifting to new models here. So rather than make people search for funding, they are trying to make it almost like an automated process. Last year, for example, I went to the Ericsson R&D Center in Bangalore. They have a very interesting process. They say that if your idea meets certain criteria, it's aligned with the business, it's got potential, whatever it is, we'll automatically give you two things. First, you get a voucher for $500. Not to go for a vacation, but to try out the idea and build a proof of concept. And you get a 1 week off from your regular job so that you can use that $500 voucher and actually do this. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to make sure that ideas just don't remain, but there is a very quick process by which the ideas can be put into action. So these are just some of the good practices which organizations have been following to get idea management working. Okay, so just look at this chart for a moment. This is data from Toyota, and this is for their factory suggestion scheme, which is for all practical purposes an idea management system. It records data at 3 different points: 1951, 71, and 86. Just look at the last line carefully and tell me what do you see interesting there. 1986. Actually, all the numbers are quite interesting. Or you can probably just first look at the number of suggestions. 2.6 million. Okay, which is 48 suggestions per person per year. That's a very good benchmark, by the way. One thing you might like to do, if you're serious about all this, is to first track how many ideas are being generated in the organization. And you can compare it with the Toyota benchmark. First of all, very few companies track that number. And even if they do, you'll find the numbers are much less. 95% participation. That's an amazing number, right? That means 95% of Toyota employees gave at least one suggestion in 1986. And 96% adoption rate. Is this good news or bad news? What do you think? Is that good or bad?
Sure. We really don't know what was the result of that.
So why might it be good news? Yeah, so it looks like people have understood, okay, these are the kind of ideas which help the company, that's why such a large number are getting adopted. The bad news could be maybe they're quite conservative ideas, right? Because if such a high percentage of ideas getting adopted, it probably means these are not very out of the box. These are very narrow, minor improvements, that's why I do. But nonetheless, it's an impressive rate and it shows you what is the potential of running a good idea management system. In fact, I'm very fond of this comment from the previous CEO of Toyota. He says that 70 years of very small improvements accumulate, they become a revolution. So I will just make a short pitch here. One of the things I think we often get fixated on is big ideas. We want those ideas which will completely change the course of the company or stand the industry on its head or something like that. But if you want to build an innovation culture in the organization, it's very unlikely that those breakthrough things are going to happen. So if you want to build confidence in innovation, you probably should start small. First, get people to start contributing small ideas, show that they work, people get more confidence, they come up with bigger ideas. That's probably a better system of getting people to contribute to innovation. Okay, I don't dwell on this too much. This is Cognizant's numbers for the same thing. You might just like to look at the last row. In financial year 11-12, they had 1,34,000 ideas. Idea per person per year about 1, not 48 of Toyota, but still what is a significant improvement when you see they had 0.01 just a few years earlier. 37% participation, 14% adoption. This shows you that in a very different industry you can still adopt or implement many of these things. Okay, another important foundation practice is creating excitement around innovation. So one of the challenges in organizations is how do you get people to think that innovation is part of their job. One organization that does that extremely well is Titan. In fact, how many of you have owned a Titan product at some point of time, or watch, jewelry, almost anywhere I go in India, it's about 90%. So So you can see, this company has certainly made a name for itself. But more than that, they're perhaps one of the most innovative large companies in India because they innovate in everything: branding, marketing, manufacturing, design, practically any activity you can think. One of the interesting things they do is run innovation campaigns. Just look at the one in red. In 2008, they ran a campaign called Simplify and Automate. Why did they run this campaign? Titan's main business today is jewelry. Right? Watch business is actually a very small business now. But one of the big problems in jewelry is that typically it's a very skill and labor intensive process making jewelry. One of the challenges Titan was facing was how do we scale up to meet demand? Then they realized the only way to do that is if you can reduce the manual intervention in the process. So that's the challenge they set their employees. They said, can you come up with ways in which you can simplify and automate the jewelry manufacturing process? Anyway, to cut a long story short, there were many important new ideas that came up. One of the most successful innovations in Titan is something called a diamond packing machine. What is a diamond packing machine? It's a robot which takes the precious stones which will be put into a piece of jewelry and packs them together in a bag so that they can later be put in the jewelry. Earlier this process was done manually. There was a person sitting with a magnifying glass, a forceps and a box of diamonds and actually picking them out one by one. So this was the first time in the world this process was automated. They have a US patent and that particular diamond bagging robot also got the Tata Groups Award for Best Innovation of the Year, 2008-2009. So you can see that sometimes these campaigns can have pretty significant impact. The last foundation element I would like to emphasize is training and development. Why is training important for innovation? It sounds a bit surprising, right? You normally think that people are either creative or they are not creative. But what a lot of researchers found is most people have some creative ability, it's just that it manifests itself in different ways. So if you can train people, if you can teach them some creative problem solving skills, maybe they can apply it in the business context as well. That's what companies like Titan are doing. For example, they have a huge program where they want everybody in the company to be involved in innovation by next year. And they are taking everybody through a structured training program. They do it with a consulting firm called Erevan. Erevan and Titan have been running this program for 7 years. Okay, so I've just told you about how do you lay the foundation. Let's talk about creating a challenge. Remember what I told you the issue is here? The issue is identifying what problem do you work on. So what we found in our work is that there are 3 good drivers to look for when you are looking at what problem to work on. The first one is obvious, feel the pain. When you see pain of the customer or pain of a stakeholder, that's usually a good place for it. But there are 2 other important things. One is we saw that a wave is useful. What is a wave? Any kind of a trend. It may be demographic, it may be technological, it may be societal. This usually also tells you that okay, this is a good problem to work on. And the last one, waste, is again another very good driver. What is waste? Waste of human effort, waste of material, waste of energy. And interestingly, we found that all 3 of these coalesce together, then you have really got a problem which is right to be solved. Let me give you a couple of examples that will help you understand this. Okay, the Bajaj Pulsar is one of India's most successful products. Bajaj was a late entrant into the motorcycle business. Hero Honda at that time had already dominated the whole motorcycle industry. And Bajaj was finding it almost impossible to compete with Hero Honda in the core motorcycle market. That's when Bajaj launched the Pulsar, which turned out to be one of the most successful bikes developed in India. Any clues on why Pulsar was so successful?
Because they operated in the 150 and 180cc market when the Hero Honda was operating in the 200cc.
Move the game a little bit away from the 100cc market. Okay. What else? Why did it attract you? Definitely, that's a good point. So there was some youth wave, yes. What else? So since you seem to be on that track, what was the pain point? So I told you it's an example of pain, wave and waste, right? So if that's the wave, what is the pain? What is the pain that Pulsar addressed?
There is no product available in the market. Similar products.
No product that does what?
Small cost effective.
You guys are all on the right track. So essentially people were tired of the Splendor or CT100 or whatever it used to be called. So there was a new generation of bike riders who were looking for something more than just transportation. They wanted a really good bike experience. They wanted power, they wanted style, they wanted good design. But they wanted this without paying a huge amount of money. Okay, I can pay 10% more, maybe I'll pay 20% more, but I can't buy a Harley Davidson. So basically you give me a bike which has all this, but with a small price tag. What was the wave? Hitesh was absolutely right. What was happening around 2001 in the industry? What was the big trend at that time? Yeah, your IT services was booming, BPO was just beginning to come, your even retail, exactly what you were saying, right? More disposable income. For the first time in India, you had a large number of young men who had enough money in their pocket to just go and buy a bike. And even if they didn't have money, they had a payslip, they could easily get a loan. And another interesting sociological part, many of them were miles away from home. So they were taking a decision on what bike to buy without their parents being involved. So buying a more powerful bike was something there was nobody to interfere with. It's a very important trend which helped the Pulsar be successful. And what are the waste issues? Waste issues are interesting. What is the simplest way of making a bike more powerful? To make your engine, you will get more power, right? But then what also happens? Your fuel consumption also goes up, right? So the key thing here was how do you get more power without using more fuel? And that's where Bajaj did some technological innovation. They created something called a DGSI engine, Digital Twin Spark Ignition, which by the way is part of their main USB even today. And they adapted a technology which had already been used in cars, no, not a new technology, but they were one of the first companies in the world to modify that for small bore engines, starting with the 150cc and then bringing it down to 125cc. And this enabled them to do that. So essentially they could provide more power without consuming a whole lot more fuel. Essentially by just burning the fuel more effectively. So this is the power of pain, wave and mist. Just to tell you that this doesn't have to be the province of large companies. Last year, I was on the jury of the NASSCOM Innovation Awards, and the award winner in the technological innovation category was this small company based in Mysore. It's a company called Vigyan Labs, and this Vigyan Labs has also addressed a very similar pain wave based issue. What did they do? Essentially what they did was they found a very interesting problem. What was this problem? That today a lot of computing is shifting to the cloud. What does shifting to the cloud mean? There are huge data centers where all this computing power is located. And those data centers are huge guzzlers of power. Not only that, even the environmental activists have today identified those data centers as a big source of greenhouse gases. So basically what Srinivas and his team did was they came up with a solution so that they could reduce the power consumption in data centers by 30%. The pain was of course the large power consumption, the wave was the increasing trend towards data centers, and the waste issue was of course the huge amount of electricity which these were using. Okay, so let me come to the next part, which is basically for trading parts. So you remember what I was telling you earlier, right? If you want a bigger pipeline, you got to get more people involved in the process. How do you get them involved? Well, one of the ways of getting them involved is to have the right role models. People should feel like, okay, so this guy is doing innovation in the company, I should also be like him, so let me also start doing something. One of the interesting questions we came across during our work was, who is the right kind of role model? And I ask you that same question. Should your role model be an employee who is like a Sachin Tendulkar? Or should your good role model be an employee who is like a Rahul Dravid? Who do you think would make a better role model to get people involved in innovation? The product. Okay. Tendulkar, why? Anybody else? Yeah, that's the point, right? See, he's a genius, right? Now, if you ask somebody who is not a genius to be like somebody who is like a genius, immediate response is, yeah, I would love to be like Tendulkar, but I can't do that. I don't have that inborn kind of a talent. But you contrast that with somebody like Rahul Dravid. He is a guy who remade himself in his cricketing career multiple times. Every time through his own effort. So, in general, if you can find somebody who people can relate to, they think, yeah, it's possible for me to be like this person. That's usually a better one. Okay, few other things maybe. One is, of course, this whole idea of community of practice. Community of practice, by the way, is something you could do even in YI. It might be an interesting thing to do. Community of practice is getting people together who have an interest in a common area. And many large companies do that so that people form natural groups which then come up with ideas. One company which does that extensively is Mindtree. Mindtree has about 50 communities of practice, each of which has been formed voluntarily. It's not mandated by the company. These are people who meet on their own because they have fun solving problems, and then of course they become a source of innovation for the company. Cognizant has tried another thing. They have trained a lot of people in their organization to be catalysts of innovation. So what they have done with their managers is they have taught their managers, if somebody comes to you with an idea, what should you do? How do you help this person take this idea? How do you help them resource it? How do you connect them to somebody else in the organization who will support it? Things like that. Which is again very important in a large organization. And last but not the least is rewards and recognition. How do you motivate people to be part of the innovation process? Now, I have some movie professors here, so I have to be careful. But if I just put it in very simple terms, most work on innovation suggests that the most important thing to do as far as people with creative abilities is concerned is recognize them, acknowledge their creative skills, not necessarily give them monetary rewards. They're not all the time looking for monetary rewards, but what they're definitely looking for is being acknowledged as people with creative abilities. So that seems to be one of the most important things you need to do if you want to drive innovation in your organization. Okay, so I've finished the first theme. Remember, the first theme was the pipeline. The second theme we are going to look at is velocity. Velocity, you remember the problem, right? Ideas get stuck, they don't move forward. Somehow there isn't a kind of momentum for ideas. But one of the biggest, or I should say most important solutions here is to experiment at low cost but with high speed. One of the reasons ideas don't progress is because there's a lot of investment involved in trying them out. So if you can find simple ways of testing them, then you have a really good potential to make innovation work for you. So what we are really saying is, you want to move quickly from the idea to the proof of concept, and also from the proof of concept to impact. And the quicker you can make these cycles, the more effective is going to be your innovation process. Let me give you a contrast. Some of you might have heard of something called a light combat aircraft program. You will see it. These days it has a fancy name. It's called Tejas. Yeah, so when did that program start in India? About 30 years ago, roughly. And how many LCAs are flying in the Air Force? None as of date, right? So, why is that so? Well, one of the reasons is that every time the R&D guys come up with something, the defense says, no, we want this, we want that. But the cycles or the time they take to modify it and come up with the next version is so long. And remember, in 30 years, the technological frontier is moving ahead very rapidly, right? So you can imagine that whatever they started with as the specs in 1985 will be extremely relevant today, right? So this is the problem when you don't do the cycles rapidly. You're in a perpetual catch-up mode, and you never really complete an innovation and take it forward. One good example of a company which is very good at these cycles is Facebook. Of course, I grant you upfront that internet companies have an advantage. The ease of doing cycles is just much greater when you are just doing things on the net. But nonetheless, just go back and see. I don't know, some of you might have seen a movie called The Social Network. It's based on the life of Mark Zuckerberg. If you go back and see that movie again, you'll see how quickly they went through many of these cycles, and that's what really pushed innovation at Facebook forward. So, of course, one of the big challenges is creating a climate for experimentation. This is particularly problematic in large companies, but it's an issue even in small companies. Because one of the things is, of course, you're scared of failing. You're worried about using up resources. So one of the key things is really to realize that failure is a very important part of the innovation process. Some of you might know some of the most successful innovations in history came out of failures. 3M's Post-it note, legendary product, was a strong adhesive which 3M was trying to develop, which failed, ultimately became the weak adhesive in the Post-it. So, there are plenty of examples of this. And one of the interesting notions, and this is extremely relevant to all of you, particularly those of you who are running companies. Can you do the last experiment first? It sounds like a contradictory notion, right? Can you do the last experiment first? What does it mean? Any guess?
Something which is very critical for the success of that idea. If you can do it on the first, you can do that.
Okay. Yeah, so I think he is pretty much on the right track. So you look at what is the most critical assumption which you are making regarding the success of your, let's say, the product innovation, for example. Let's say you are doing something which has never been tried in the market before. What is probably the most critical assumption? Yeah, customer acceptance is the most critical thing, right? So can you test customer acceptance upfront without perhaps doing all the detailed work? Because if you can be sure that customers will accept, then it's worth doing all the other things. But if customers are not going to accept it, then you might as well not get into all those steps. Or if it's a technology which has never been tried before, maybe your most important assumption is, will this work? So the sooner you can establish its feasibility, the better off you are in doing it. So that's what this whole idea means. It basically says, can you identify the must-do experiments quickly and do them first before you go forward. Now, one of the critical things we often talk about is, can you avoid what is called the failure curse? You know this movie, right? Which movie is this? So what was happening in this scene?
The boy was showing the model to asking for more time.
He was asking for more time, right? And what did that horrible virus tell him? He said, no, all your time is up, so now you're not going to graduate this year. I don't know what happened after that. What is the fallacy here? What was really the purpose of that project? Why do engineering colleges make students do projects? Yeah, can you really put all that theory stuff you have learned into practice? That's what it's all about. Somewhere along the line, the principal forgot why they were doing the projects. So we call this the failure fallacy because they're essentially saying that the purpose of an experiment is not to determine something as a success or failure or label it, but is to learn something from that and then move forward. Which is exactly the kind of thing one needs to build in an organization if one wants innovation to go ahead. Now, once you have created the prototype or proof of concept, you have a different type of challenge. That challenge is quite well exemplified by this example. You know the person on the left? George Fernandez, right? And what's on the right? That's Dudhsagar from the Oakland Railway. What is the connection between these two?
He was the railway minister.
That's all? Is there something or there's more connection between them? Was it George Fernandez's idea from the railway? Neither actually. It was an idea going back to the British time. It's more than a 100-year-old idea. Then what was George Fernandez's role in this? Yeah, so when he became the railway minister, apparently one of the first things he did was he called on the railway ministry guys and said, my dream is to build Oakland Railway. Those guys are all aghast. They said, look, people have talked about it before, but it's doomed to fail, don't even try. Government is the same. So that you guys don't worry, I'll get you all the resources, I'll get you all the clearances. You guys just build the project. Essentially, he played the role of a champion. So, most innovation, particularly after it's been shown at the proof of concept stage, needs somebody to champion it. Because that's when serious resource investments are required. That's when somebody has to really stand up for the project and say, let's take it forward. And that's true whether, of course, in a large company, it might be a champion in the corporate bureaucracy, but even in a small company, the champion could be an external customer or somebody who is really supporting you to take that particular idea forward. Without that, you really don't have successful innovation happening. Okay, the third part of this solution of the velocity problem, we often talk about experimentation with products and technologies, but increasingly people are also doing a lot of experimentation with business models. One of our favorite examples is a company called Shaadi.com, one of the first matrimonial portals in India. The guy who started this was a guy called Anupam Mittal. He was an NRI. He saw all the stuff happening on the internet abroad and he said, this is a great thing, it will work for matrimonials. So he set it up. But after 6 months of running it, he found it was not achieving traction. So he was very puzzled. So he asked his relatives back home, why isn't it working? So they told him, look, you are an idiot, you've forgotten what happens in India. Because what this Mittal guy had done, he had thought that his customer is the boy or girl who wants to get married. He thought he could reach them through the internet, and he thought that a subscription model will work. What his relatives told him was, you've forgotten India. Your parents are actually the ones who are the customer, not the boy or girl. If you want to reach the parents, you can't reach them through the internet. You have to follow conventional advertising models. And what he also found was interesting. The parents were far too smart. They are not going to pay up any cash upfront. They are not going to pay anything unless they see some proposals which are relevant to their kids. So even the whole payment model had to change. So what we basically saying is a simple thing. We are saying that just like you iterate with a technical idea, you also need to experiment with business models if you want to be successful in the innovation space. Okay, I'm coming to the last part now, which is really how do you solve the last problem, which is the batting average problem. Right? So the batting average problem, we have a few different methods. What is the real challenge in batting average? We are saying how do you make sure your innovation achieves traction in the market, right? That's what we are saying. Because you want to align the innovation with business success. One important technique is a technique called the sandbox. This is, by the way, the idea itself has been around for some time. C.K. Prahalad, several other people talked about the sandbox. What is the sandbox about? The sandbox basically says that do intensive experimentation within well-defined boundaries. Just like when you take kids to a playground, you tell them, okay, you can play within this area, but you can't go over this. Within this, you can have as much fun as you like, but you can't go over. So the idea is the same. You draw the boundaries clearly and you do intensive experimentation within the boundaries. Where do the boundaries come from, by the way? Where do you get the boundaries from? Need, market, understanding the customer, that's where the boundaries come from. So you may just think of a simple example, right? You think of the Tata Nano. The Nano, of course, it hasn't done well. One of the reasons it hasn't done well, one of the reasons it hasn't done well is one of the important boundary conditions, which was much touted for a long time. The 1 lakh price got violated along the way. Right? Today, I don't know, the Nano is closer to 2 lakhs than 1 lakh. I mean, several other reasons it failed, but if you lose sight of those boundary conditions, essentially your product is no longer aligned with the market. Second important approach is to use platforms. What is the advantage of using a platform? Platform is basically saying, can I with the same base innovation address different markets through different areas? Best example is Maruti. Maruti has a presence across the spectrum in the small car business. There are only 3 core platforms underneath that. So the core, design, the wheels, the basic chassis, all that stuff. Basically, the only 3 of those designs underneath. So the whole thing, same thing is getting reused across multiple points. In the biotech industry, a company like Biocon uses platforms. Basically, they use a fermentation technology platform across many of their things. The third important way of making sure your innovation has an impact is to follow open innovation. What is open innovation? It's a very simple idea. It says that no organization can have all the knowledge it needs within the boundaries of the organization. So collaboration is critical if you want to be successful in. I give you my favorite example. That's from P&G. So you know P&G, Procter & Gamble, is a consumer product company. One of their very successful brands is a brand called Olay. It's a skin cream brand. But they were all having a big problem because one of the big is older people in Europe and US. You know the demographics, right? Your US and Europe are getting older, right? The population is getting older. And what are old people looking for in a cream? They want to look young, right? Basically, I mean, that's the simple thing, right? So basically, you want a cream which will make your skin look smoother, not wrinkle and all the rest. But while Olay was trying to address that market, they didn't really have a credible product that could address that. So they don't know what to do. But they came across this research institute in France, which was involved in rehabilitating injured in fire accidents. What happens when your skin gets burnt? The skin gets all shriveled up. Right? If you get a really bad burn, sometimes the skin never grows back properly. Right? So what these French guys had figured out, that there were some amino peptides which help the skin grow better. Can you see the connection? That same compound, when put into a skin cream, actually has a anti-wrinkling effect. Anyway, to cut a long story short again, P&G collaborated with that lab. They started this new range of creams called Regenerist. I don't know the exact price, but some small jar costs some 100 euros, some astronomical price. And the reason it's important is because we realized that P&G would never have been successful in this product unless they had collaborated with that company. Because they are not into helping burns victims and things like that. Right? So it would have been very difficult for them to come up on that compound to their own work. The collaboration helped them link that particular compound with their cream and come out with a successful. Okay, we are down to the last stage. Last step is really about what we call de-risking, or you can say creating a margin of safety. Now, innovation by definition is a risky process. So, good innovators try to find ways to manage risk. There are many techniques. We don't have time to go into all of them, but one of our favorite techniques is a technique called a pre-mortem. What's a pre-mortem? It is basically the opposite of post-mortem. Post-mortem is simple, right? Something untoward happens, you try to find out why it happened. Pre-mortem is turning this logic the other way and saying, can I imagine that something untoward has happened and do something like a role play? And now I'm trying to list out all the possible reasons why this happened. Those then become your risk factors and you try to avoid it. So one of the companies to which we have been trying to apply this pre-mortem framework is Boeing. Some of you who are interested in aviation might know that Boeing has an aircraft called the Dreamliner. It's pretty amazing in terms of its fuel economy. I think it's 25% lower cost. But it's had a whole host of problems, particularly connected to batteries. And one of the big reasons for this appears to have been that they simply didn't test the batteries. And we just trying to see that if they had really done a better pre-mortem, they could have really anticipated many of the problems with the battery. Okay, so what do you do with all this stuff? So the last thing I wanted to just present to you today is just a sort of picture of how do you progress in this model. So I don't know, you can now just see where your organization lies on this scale. Okay? So let's say you don't track ideas. You don't even know how many ideas you have no numbers, you have no process at all. We call that level 1 process, it's ad hoc, you're basically relying on some jugaad to happen. That's a kind of base level of innovation. Level 2 is where you have some foundation in place. At least you have some basic things, you have an idea management system, however primitive. You do some effort to train people. You have an innovation dashboard, so you at least try to measure and monitor how many innovations are happening. Maybe about 10% of your organization is involved in innovation. Level 3 is when you start going to a more engaged state. You now have at least 10% of your ideas becoming prototypes. The organization is able to respond to innovation ideas in less than a month. Participation rate can be closer to 30%. You now have some kind of incubation pipeline, you have some kind of impact calculator, and you have some amount of experimentation and reviewing now. We found that most companies in India are either, those who are doing some innovation are either in level 2 or level 3. But very few of them have actually been able to transcend level 3. What happens in level 4 and 5? Level 4 and 5 are where you're moving to a big idea pipeline. You have a whole set of sandboxes. Maybe at level 5 you have something like 30% of your revenue coming from innovation in the last 5 years. basically you're much more effective in your ability to implement. So we see that the big challenge for organizations here is really moving from level 3 to 3. Okay, so I know that pretty much ends my presentation. Just to let me sum up quickly. These are the three problems. There's a pipeline problem, velocity problem, and batting average problem. So for the pipeline problem, we talked about three things. We talked about laying the foundation, creating the challenge group, building participation. For the velocity problem, we again talked about three things. We talked about experimenting at low cost with high speed, moving quickly from prototype to incubation, and integrating with the business model. And the third thing we said is the batting average problem. We talked about sandboxes, platforms, open innovation, and de-risking the innovation process. That's basically what I wanted to share with you. Happy to answer any questions or any comments or whatever you